Today we are starting a very important journey that changed the direction of world history. The acceptance of Islam by the Turks. This change was not as easy as it may seem. The Turks already believed in one God and were not strangers to the religions of Ibrahim. Some sources even say that Dulkarnain mentioned in the Quran was actually the famous Turkish leader Oguz Kagan. Still, there were about 60 years of hard wars between the Turks and the Arabs. Then came a turning point in history, the Battle of Talaswen. The Turks supported the Abbasids in their war against China. Everything changed. After this event, the Turks got to know Islam better, and over time became its strongest defenders. As the Abbasids became weaker, the Turks took a leading role in the Islamic world, and later during the Ottoman period, they even took the Caliphate. Maybe you are hearing this powerful story for the first time. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss videos like this. Islam began to be preached by the messenger of Allah, Prophet Muhammad, starting from the 7th century CE. In 622, when the Prophet arrived in Medina, the foundations of the Islamic State were laid. During his lifetime, Islam spread to almost the entire Arabian Peninsula. After the Prophet passed away, Abu Bakr became the political leader of the state. He first suppressed the rebellions of Arab tribes who left Islam. Through preaching and conquests, he began spreading the religion beyond Arabia. Under Umar's rule, the spread of Islam and the Islamic State gained even more speed by Allah's will. The famous battles of Qadisiyah and Nihawand were won during his time. These victories ended the centuries-old Sassanid Empire. This opened new paths for the Islamic State. Now, Iran and Khorasan became the next goals. The first contact between the Turks and Muslim Arabs began after the Battle of Nihawand in 642 CE during the rule of Umayyad. The time Arab conquests started moving toward Turkestan. Even during the civil war between Muawiyah and Ali, governors under Ali continued campaigns into Turkish lands. But after Ali, the internal conflict led to the rise of the Umayyad dynasty. With their rule, the structure of the Islamic State changed completely. The goal of spreading Islam became less important. Instead, the focus shifted to full political control and setting up systems for economic gain. The Umayyad state became one of the strongest powers of its time, but at the same time, it had to deal with rebellions and opposition across the land. Their harsh response to revolts and internal critics, including the Khawarij, made the state very authoritarian and strict. During this period, Muawiyah gave Abdullah bin Amir, the former governor of Basra, the task of reclaiming lost lands. Abdullah successfully recaptured areas in Iran and Khorasan. However, Muawiyah removed him from his post, claiming he was too soft against rebels. In 674, Nali Ubaidullah, known for his harsh rule, was made governor of Khorasan. He became the first Arab commander to cross the Ceyhun Oxus River and enter Turkish lands. At that time, Turks and other Asian peoples lived in the region of Mawaraonar. They believed in different religions, mainly the sky god Goktan. Also, many noble Sassanid families fleeing from Arab armies had migrated to this region. In the same year, Ubaidullah crossed the river and captured Bakentan, several other Turkish cities. He then launched a quick raid on Bukhara. He was the first to lead an army deep into Turkish land, and he is also known as one of those responsible for the killing of Hussein in Karbala in 677. Turkish princes who refused to submit rose up in rebellion. The new Umayyad governor said attacked and recaptured Bukhara in the early 600s and 80s. The Umayyads were dealing with internal problems. During this time, local Turkish rulers tried to unite and take and back their lands, but they were not successful. The local Turkish rulers tried to fight back by capturing Tirme, but they couldn't go further. During this period, the cities were constantly changing hands. The Umayyads could not fully advance, and the Turkish leaders could not push them out completely. This deadlock caused the Umayyads to change governors. Frequently, Caliph Abdul Malik tried to solve internal problems and start a new campaign, but he did not get the results he wanted. Between the years 706 and 715, the Umayyads launched major attacks in Turkish regions and started brutal wars against non-Muslim Turks. They killed many and looted cities. For example, in 706, when they captured Bakant, the commander ordered all Turkish warriors to be killed and the city to be plundered. This caused great shock in the regions. Similarly, in 712, when they reached Talikan, everyone who fought against them was killed. The roads for 4 farsakhs, about 20 kilometers, were lined with people hanged on both sides. Despite the bloodshed, neither side could gain full control. Mawa-Una had turned into a war zone. There was nothing but battle in the minds of the people. The siege of Samarkand began. It was a fierce and exhausting struggle. Support forces from Fargana tried to push the Arab army away from the city walls, but failed. The battlefield looked like a living hell. It was one of the most intense wars the region had seen. In 713, the Umayyads managed to capture Samarkand, the largest Turkish city. In 714, they launched another campaign and captured several more cities. Around this time, the death of Hajjaj was announced, but Caliph Walid ordered the military campaigns to continue. In 716, Yazid bin Muhalab was appointed governor of Khorasan. Yazid hated the Turks and looked for every chance to take revenge on them. That year, the Turkish center in Georgian was surrounded. The Turks resisted without help for 7 months, but in the end, they had to surrender. The city was looted, many were hanged, and all the men were gathered in a valley and killed. Their blood flowed into the rivers and streams. The Turks were not becoming Muslim by force. In fact, this went against the Sunnah of the Prophet. At that time, the Turks were slowly accepting Islam through the visits and teachings of Islamic scholars, even despite the Umayyads from the beginning. The Umayyad policy did not help people love Islam. Instead, it made them hate it. They followed Arab nationalism and practiced tribalism. They treated non-Arab Muslims unfairly. Some Khazar and Mawara-Una Turks, who became Muslim during the Umayyad period, later left Islam because of the bad treatment they received. As we said before, the Umayyads only wanted control and income from these lands. They saw Turks as second-class people and did not care if they accepted Islam or not. Only a small number of Turks became Muslim in that period. These were usually people who learned about the religion from Muslims living in Bukhara or Samarkand, or poor villagers who were suffering under local rulers. If a Turk became Muslim, they faced problems from both sides. The Umayyad government was unhappy because Muslims paid less tax. Their own local Turkish communities also reacted negatively. A few Turks who did accept Islam strongly opposed the Umayyad government, of course. Turks were not only in this region. This video talks mainly about Khorasan and Mawara-Una, the first contact points between Turks and Islam, but most Turkish people at that time were still deep in Asia. And the northern steppes, many of them had not even heard of Islam yet. During this period of war between Turks and Arabs, something changed. In the year 717, Umar bin Abdul Aziz became Caliph. He ordered an end to the raids and attacks on the Khorasan border. He said Turks must not be harmed, that all humans are equal before Allah. Everyone should be treated fairly. The Caliph also declared that Arabs were not better than other people and that new Muslims should not pay the jizya tax. Umar said he believed in the sincerity of the Turks who became Muslim, and he decided to send scholars to teach Islam. In the region, Umayyad commanders were against this. They said Turks only understand the sword and the whip. They didn't believe the Turkish converts and asked to check if the men were circumcised. When Caliph Umar heard this, he became angry and said, Allah did not send Muhammad as a circumciser, but as a messenger. Umar bin Abdulaziz was very different from other Umayyad rulers, but his time as caliph was short. After his death, things went back to the old ways. New players entered the scene. The year 717 brought more changes. This year, the Turkish joined the war between the Arabs and the Turks. The Turkish lived near the Sehune-Jaksates River in the 690s. So after the Western Gokturks became weak and isolated, Turkish tribes came together again under the Turkish Union. By the end of the century, they had spread from Turfan to the Sehun River. Meanwhile, in the north, the Eastern Gokturks rebelled against the Tang dynasty in China and established the second Gokturk Khaganate with Kapgan Kaganthe. Gokturks entered a strong period and moved west. As a result, the Turgesh-Madian alliance with China and the wars between the Gokturks and the Turgesh, the great Turkish vizier Tonyu Kuk defeated the Turgesh at the Battle of Bolchu in 698 and set the western border when the Turkish Kagan didn't want to join the Gokturk rule and made another alliance with China. The Gokturks launched another campaign in 711. They defeated the Turkish again at Bolchu and took control in 710. The Gokturks, one of the greatest Turkish states, fell into trouble. The central authority collapsed. China became stronger, and the Turkish declared independence, joining forces with other Turkish tribes. But they couldn't expand eastward because China would not allow it, so they turned west toward the area beyond the Sehun, where the Umayyad forces were the governor of Khorasan treated the local people who supported the Turkish very harshly. Many civilians were forced to leave their lands, said who chased them, caught some incogitant and killed all the captured soldiers and civilians except the merchants. These events in 722 increased the hatred toward the Arabs. The Umayyads wanted to take Ferganato, reach deeper into Turkestan. An army led by Governor Muslim crossed the river, but they were met by Seljuk Kagan in the battle called Yemilakhti. Umayyad army was badly defeated and forced to retreat by 724. This meant that Arab forces were pushed back from the east side of the Sehun River. After this, many people began to see the Turkish as liberators. The Turkish even won some victories west of the Sehun. This weakened Umayyad control in the region. As the conflict continued, the Caliph kept changing the regional governors to solve the crisis, but all the new governors were defeated by Seljuk Kaganthe. Balance of power began to shift. The Umayyads, realizing how hard it was to fight, the Turgesh offered Islam to the Kagan, but he refused. 1 year later, the Turgesh surrounded Samarkand. The city commander asked for help from Junayd, the Umayyad governor in Nashak. Junayd set out with 12 Njurzo men, but Seljuk Kagan forced them into the mountains. In the battle known as the Pass Battle, the Umayyad army broke apart under Turkish attacks. Only 2,000 soldiers reached the city. The Umayyad capital heard about the disaster and sent 20,000 fresh troops in. 732, Seljuk Kagan lifted the siege of both Bukhara and Samarkand. Later, in the southern Arab army under Asad defeated the Turkish and the balance was restored. When the Umayyad governor Junayd died in 734, the remaining Umayyad power in the region collapsed completely. At the same time, the Abbasids raised the black flag in Khorasan and started a revolution against the Umayyad Sol groups opposing. The Umayyad rule began to gather under this black flag. One of the leaders of the rebellion, Abu Muslim, took refuge with Seljuk Kagan for a short time. The Kagan saw this as a chance to launch a large campaign. He was supported by Turkish leaders in Mawara Unahahu, wanted freedom, and by some Arab commanders who had joined the rebellion. The Kagan not only crossed the Sehun River but also passed the Jaihun River and entered Georgian. However, some of his allies betrayed him. He was defeated in battle by the Umayyad governor Asad. This defeat destroyed his reputation at The same time, many big changes were happening. The Turkish became weak due to internal problems. The Second Gokturk Khaganate collapsed. China started to gain power again, and the Abbasids overthrew the Umayyads through revolution. These events completely changed the political game in the region when the Abbasids took control in 750. Their attitude toward the Turks was very different from the Umayyads. They ended the unfair policies of the Umayyads and treated the non-Arab groups who supported them with respect. Leaders who used to say Turks only understand the sword and whip were gone now. The caliphs would say there is no one braver than a Turk, and some caliphs even had Turkish mothers. The Abbasid caliphs began to include Turks in their armies, made them royal guards, and gave them high ranks and positions in this new environment. Islam started to spread among Turks for the first time in a real way, but it was still limited because the pain from past events was not forgotten easily. When the Turkish weakened due to Chinese interference, the rulers of Fergana, Bukhara, Samarkand and Tokharistan had no choice but to seek help even from the Umayyadsat. This time, the Tang dynasty of China was at its peak. They took advantage of the fall of the Gokturk, brought many Turkish tribes under their control, broke up the Turkish, and defeated the Tibetan Empire. Wishing to add more victories, the Chinese aimed to expand both their rule and Buddhism. They started putting pressure on the Turks. B. 751. The Tang dynasty had taken control over many Turkish groups living near the Seyhun River, but when a Chinese commander treated the people of Tashkent harshly, other Turkish tribes in the region began to resist. However, the Turks had no political unity at the time and knew they could not fight the Chinese alone, since they also knew China was preparing for a major military campaign. They convinced Abu Muslim, the Abbasid governor of Khorasanto, support an attack on Kuchakarashahotan, and Kashgar. Chinese commander Chao learned about the situation and prepared his army in the region. His army also included Karluk Turks from the area near Lake Issyk. Ziyad bin Salihoni, of the successful generals of the Abbasid Revolution, was ordered to go east with his troops. He reached the area near Tashkent. The Chinese army pulled back toward the Talas River and chose a good position to fight in this struggle between Tang Chine, which wanted to move west, and the Abbasid Arabs, who wanted to move east. A third nation entered the scene, the Turks, fighting to protect their identity. The outcome of the battle would be decided by them. There are different versions of this battle, but the general course goes like this. The Chinese army's center was made up of spear-wielding infantry. In front of them were the usual crossbowmen. The wings stood the Karluk Turks. The Abbasid army placed archers in front of their infantry and put cavalry on both wings. The battle began with both sides firing arrows. Although both had their own strengths, neither side gained a clear advantage. Then Ziyad ordered his infantry to charge. The two armies clashed near the banks of the Talas Riveras. The battle went on. Ziyad noticed that his side was losing more men, so he ordered his cavalry to attack from the flanks. The Arab horsemen rushed forward, but instead of weak enemy lines, they met Turkish cavalry. After a long and intense fight, both sides were exhausted and pulled back. The armies rested through the evening. At dawn, they began fighting again in the same way, but the Abbasid side was getting weaker due to heavy losses for 4 days. The battle continued like this. Chinese General Cao was now confident that victory was near. At dawn on the 5th day, he gave the order for the Turkish cavalry to charge. The Turks, under their chiefs, spurred their horses forward, but instead of attacking the Arabs, they turned and charged straight at the Chinese general. Cao was completely shocked. He'd been hit from behind. The Turks had secretly made an agreement with Ziyad the night before and changed sides. The Turks had no desire to accept Chinese rule or be under their control, compared to China making an alliance with the Abbasids was a better option for them. They made their decision based on what was best for their future and interests. When the Turks attacked, the The Chinese infantry from Bahinda Gap opened in their lines. Ziad saw this chance and ordered his soldiers to attack. The Chinese army was now trapped between two forces. This surprise move took victory out of General Cao's hands. In the chaos, the Chinese soldiers could not hold their position any longer. Most of the army was almost destroyed, and only the general and a few units barely managed to escape. The victory belonged to the Abbasids and the Turks. After this defeat, China fell into a deep period of internal crisis. Although the Abbasids won the battle, they could not advance. Further control of Central Asia was left to neither the Chinese nor the Arabs. The Turks regrouped and reclaimed their homeland. The Battle of Talas had many important results. The influence of Buddhism in Central Asia decreased because the connection between China and India was broken there. Understanding of Buddhism began to differ. The Arabs learned the technology of papermaking from the Chinese and carried it west. As a result of the battle, the strict policies of the Umayyads were replaced by the more flexible approach of the Abbasids. This allowed the first real steps of the Turks toward Islam to begin after the Abbasid period, when the Islamic civilization became less active. The spread of Islam among the Turks continued slowly. Through merchants and scholars, more and more Turks learned about the religion. Turkish leaders accepted the religion that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had preached, the mass conversion of the Oghuz. Turks, during a time when the Islamic world was weakening, became a turning point. They began to see themselves as protectors and leaders of the new religion. This process began in the 10th century, and the goal of the Turks to carry the message of Islam to others, one of the greatest sunnahs of our Prophet, never stopped from the Ottomans until today.